The Aliyah ghost lights, a haunting phenomenon. West Bengal, India, is known for its fair share of allegedly haunted places, but perhaps none are as eerie or as intriguing as the Aliyah ghost lights. In the swampy marshes of West Bengal, there have been numerous sightings of these mysterious lights, known locally as Aliyah or jack-o'-lanterns. Described as flickering balls of light, they typically appear in the marshy regions of both West Bengal and Bangladesh. Many locals believe these lights are responsible for the deaths of numerous fishermen in the area. The fishing community has long been mesmerized by these unexplainable lights, and some fishermen have even followed them, only to fall victim to the treacherous waters. Many believe that these lights are the spirits of fishermen who lost their lives in the marshes. In some instances, the lights confuse fishermen, causing them to fall into the water and get lost. While in other cases, locals believe the lights may guide fishermen to safety, warning them of impending danger. The Aliyah lights are not limited to West Bengal. They've been spotted in various locations across the world and are often linked with the paranormal, sometimes associated with good spirits and sometimes with malicious ones. It's said that once you follow one of these lights, it flickers and gradually diminishes in size, eventually disappearing, which often causes the follower to panic and lose their way. People across the globe have reported seeing these lights in graveyards, swamps, and bogs, where they've been given different names. Anaya Kaur from Siliguri had a terrifying experience when her husband, who was on a solo fishing trip, mentioned seeing one of these lights. After the call ended abruptly, Anaya's husband was never seen again. The House of Horrors, a tale of mysterious disappearances. In 2014, taxi drivers in Ibadan, Nigeria started mysteriously disappearing. Initially, there was no concrete evidence to suggest foul play, but as more people vanished, strange figures began lurking around the area. Despite the growing number of disappearances, the police were reportedly uncooperative, dismissing the cases and suggesting that the missing men had simply run off. However, in March 2014, a motorcyclist riding through a nearby highway heard cries for help coming from a forest and alerted the authorities. When police investigated the area, they stumbled upon a chilling discovery, a house hidden deep in the trees. The stench was unbearable as they uncovered the decomposed bodies of over 20 victims, many bound with chains. The bodies were in various stages of decomposition, with some missing limbs and organs. Police also found numerous human remains scattered across the woods. In a separate building, they discovered the personal belongings of the victims, including licenses, clothing, and even children's toys. 15 individuals were rescued, all of them severely malnourished and chained up. Some of the survivors claimed they had been kidnapped, tortured, and held in captivity by their abductors. Some even suggested that their captors might have been posing as government officials. The truth behind these disturbing events remains unclear, and despite some arrests, no one has officially been charged for these atrocities. The disappearance of Zeb Wayne Quinn, a mystery unsolved. On January 2, 2000, Zeb Wayne Quinn, an 18-year-old from Asheville, North Carolina, disappeared under strange circumstances. He had finished his shift at Walmart and was planning to go car shopping with his coworker, Robert Jason Owens. The two were seen together at a nearby gas station around 9:15 p.m., where they purchased sodas. According to Robert, after leaving the gas station, Zeb signaled for him to pull over and mentioned that he had received a page. Zeb was reportedly frantic after returning from a payphone call, telling Robert that he needed to cancel their plans. Zeb then sped off, rear-ending Robert's truck in the process. Hours later, Robert ended up in the hospital due to injuries sustained from a second car accident that night, though no official report was ever filed. The next day, Zeb's mother reported him missing. 2 days after his disappearance, a call was made to Zeb's workplace claiming that he was sick and would not be coming in. However, the voice on the other end was not Zeb's. It was later revealed that Robert had made the call, saying he was helping Zeb by calling in sick for him. Several days later, clues continued to surface. Zeb's car was found with strange items inside, including lipstick on the rear windshield and a live puppy in the vehicle. Despite an investigation and a composite sketch of the person seen driving Zeb's car, Zeb's whereabouts remained a mystery. In 2017, Robert was arrested for Zeb's murder, though his story claimed that his uncle had ordered the murder to keep Zeb away from a woman named Misty Taylor, who was allegedly involved in Zeb's life. However, no definitive answers about Zeb's disappearance were ever found, and Robert was sentenced to multiple decades in prison for other crimes. The mysterious death of Rebecca Zahow, a tragic end. On July 13, 2011, Rebecca Zahow was found dead at the Spreckles Mansion in Coronado, California. Her body was discovered nude, bound, and gagged, hanging from a balcony. Her death occurred 2 days after the tragic fall of her boyfriend's son, Max Shackney, who had fallen down the mansion staircase and was in critical condition. Despite initial suspicions of foul play, the death was ruled a suicide by authorities. However, Rebecca's family was not convinced and fought to uncover the truth. The timing of her death, following Max's fall, and the manner in which her body was found, bound and gagged, raised serious doubts. Rebecca's sisters pressed for an investigation, suspecting that Jonah Shackney's brother, Adam, might have played a role in her death. According to their theory, Adam could have been seeking revenge for Max's fall. After years of legal battles, in 2018, a civil trial found Adam Shackney responsible for Rebecca's death, and her family was awarded over $5 million in damages. Although this legal battle brought some closure, many still questioned the circumstances surrounding Rebecca's death. The fact that she was found bound and gagged, and that the police failed to find any conclusive evidence of suicide, leaves the true cause of her death shrouded in mystery. The unsolved mysteries that continue to haunt us. Some stories linger in our minds, leaving us with unanswered questions that never fade. These mysterious tales continue to haunt, drawing us into realms where reason falls short. In West Bengal, India, the Aliyah ghost lights flicker over the marshes, with fishermen claiming they either guide or mislead, possibly the souls of lost sailors. Their true nature remains a chilling mystery. In Ibadan, Nigeria, taxi drivers began vanishing in 2014, only for a motorcyclist to discover a horrifying scene in the forest. A decaying house filled with bound, tortured bodies. Despite some survivors, the identity of the perpetrators remains unknown. In Asheville, North Carolina, Zeb Wayne Quinn disappeared in 2000 under strange circumstances. His last moments, involving conflicting statements from his co-worker, remain unsolved, leaving his family in the dark. The death of Rebecca Zahow in 2011 at the Spreckles Mansion in California also remains a mystery. Found bound and hanging, her death came days after a tragic family accident, and despite a civil trial pointing to foul play, no criminal charges were filed. The true cause of her death is still debated. These unresolved mysteries remind us that some questions may never be answered, and some stories are destined to remain a haunting puzzle. Kathy Marie Moulton's disappearance, September 24, 1971, marked the last day 16-year-old Kathy Marie Moulton was seen. She had planned to attend a dance that evening in her hometown of Portland, Maine, and asked her father to drop her off on Cumberland Avenue. Kathy intended to buy pantyhose and toothpaste before getting ready for the event, so she stopped by a music store on Forest Avenue to visit a friend. She told her friend she'd see her at the dance and planned to walk home, about 1.5 miles away. Kathy was last seen walking down Forest Avenue, carrying a brown leather Mexican clutch purse containing her house key, 2 tubes of toothpaste, and a small amount of cash. When Kathy didn't return by dinner, her parent became concerned and reported her missing. She was later seen in a stolen blue Cadillac with her friend Lester Everett, although it's unclear whether Kathy left with him willingly. Weeks later, Kathy, Lester, and another man, Ronald Reed Purley, were spotted in a remote area of Aroostook County. Lester was found alone and claimed he didn't know Kathy's whereabouts. A garage employee in Fort Fairfield recalled seeing the trio, noting that Ronald seemed to be controlling Kathy's movements, even walking her to and from the bathroom with his hand on her neck. Reports later indicated that Kathy, Lester, and Ronald had worked at McBride's farm in Mars Hill during the potato harvest. Kathy became increasingly distrustful of Lester, often begging to return home, but he refused. She befriended a teenage girl on the farm who later recalled Kathy's anxiety about her parents' worry and her fear of the men at the farm. On the evening of September 29, 1971, while other workers enjoyed a bonfire, Lester drove off with Kathy, claiming they were just going for a ride. He returned the next morning, saying he'd dropped her off at a camp. In reality, Lester had taken Kathy across the Canadian border to the Tobique Reserve and left her with Ronald. After the potato harvest, Lester and others left for Florida, never returning to Maine. When questioned, Lester claimed he didn't know what happened to Kathy. Lester died from cancer in the mid-1980s at 35. Ronald, a convicted rapist and home invader, has long been a prime suspect, but he refused to cooperate with authorities, even when offered immunity for information about Kathy. Investigators have speculated that Kathy may have been killed by Lester and her body left in the woods. But relatives of Ronald later verified that Lester had dropped Kathy off at their home, claiming a family member had harmed her. It's unclear whether this theory is true, as the family has refused to cooperate with the police. Investigators believe Kathy may have died on the Tobique Reserve before Thanksgiving 1971, but they never had enough evidence to file charges or obtain warrants to search Ronald's family home. In 1980, a hunter discovered a skeleton near Smyrna, Maine, surrounded by women's clothing. Some believed the remains might have been Kathy's, but the hunter couldn't retrace his steps to lead police to the site, and the bones were never found again. Kathy was a junior at Deering High School and was known to be a happy girl with no reason to run away. Her father passed away in 2017, but her mother continues to hold out hope for closure in the case. Mary Virginia Carpenter's mysterious disappearance. Mary Virginia Carpenter, 21, from Texarkana, Texas, went missing in Denton during the summer of 1948. She was last seen by a taxi driver on June 1, 1948, after traveling 6 hours to attend Texas Women's University for a summer term. Mary had transferred from the University of Arkansas to pursue a career change and had re-enrolled for the summer term. The taxi driver, Edgar Ray Zachary, recalled stopping in front of Brackenridge Hall at 9:00 p.m., where Mary paid him $1 to pick up her trunk the next day. He then saw Mary talking to two young men near a yellow convertible, which he thought was a Pontiac. Edgar assumed the men were friends, so he drove away, but Mary was never seen again. Some of Mary's former boyfriends speculated she might have run away with a lover, but her family disagreed, believing she would never leave without telling them. Mary had been very close to her family, and her recent breakup with her fiancé made the theory of her running away seem unlikely. Investigators initially focused on her boyfriend, Kenny Branham, and the taxi driver, Edgar, but both passed polygraph tests. Edgar, who had a history of petty crimes and abuse, was later linked to a failed rape charge in 1957. In 1967, Edgar's wife changed her statement, revealing that he hadn't arrived home until 2 or 3 a.m. on the night Mary vanished. Though Edgar passed polygraph tests, suspicion remained. The case took another turn when, in 1998, investigators received a tip suggesting that two men had raped and killed Mary, burying her body near the Texas Women's University campus. However, by this time, both suspects had died, and no evidence was found to substantiate the claim. Mary's case remains unsolved, with various leads surfacing over the years, but no concrete evidence. Both of her parents have passed away, leaving her 3 cousins still hoping for closure. Alvin Matlock's disappearance. Alvin Matlock, 21, went missing in Spokane, Washington during the spring of 1951. Alvin lived in a cabin on Browns Mountain, and his family first grew concerned when he failed to show up for Thanksgiving dinner. His mother visited his cabin, but it was empty, and his vehicles were gone. A neighbor claimed Alvin had quietly packed up and moved to Alaska, and the family initially believed this. But years of no contact made it clear Alvin was not in Alaska. Alvin's family later learned of a rumor that he had been involved in an affair with a married woman, leading to a violent confrontation with the woman's husband. Some believed Alvin was shot during the scuffle and left to die. However, no evidence was found to support this claim. Alvin's family had no records of him living in Alaska, and the story from the neighbor who reported his move remains suspicious. Patricia Matlock, Alvin's sister-in-law, investigated possible leads, but no new information surfaced. In 2016, at a missing persons event hosted by the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Office, Alvin's brother Clyde provided DNA samples and photographs in hopes of finding his brother's remains. He still hopes one day to have closure and learn the truth about Alvin's disappearance. The creepy gnome of Argentina. In 2008, a bizarre and unsettling sighting of a gnome was captured on video in General Güemes, Argentina. The footage was filmed by Jose Alvarez, who reported encountering the creature while spending time with friends late at night. "We were chatting about a fishing trip around 1 a.m. Jose explained. "I was casually filming on my phone while the others were joking around. Suddenly we heard a strange noise like stones being thrown. We turned and saw the grass moving. At first, we thought it was a dome, but then this small gnome-like figure emerged from the shadows, and we were terrified. Since the initial sighting, other locals claimed to have seen the gnome too, leaving the town gripped with fear, the devil's footprints. On the night of February 9th, 1855, after a light snowfall, an eerie phenomenon occurred in Devon, England. A series of hoof-like footprints appeared in the snow, stretching over 100 miles. Each print measured between 1.5 to 2.5 inches wide and was spaced about 8 inches apart. The trail bizarrely defied logic. It traveled in straight lines, crossing over rooftops, walls, rivers, went to hell, haystacks. The prints also led to and from small drain pipes as narrow as 4 inches in diameter. At the time, there were whispers of a devil-like figure roaming the area. Townsfolk armed themselves and attempted to track the beast, but no culprit was ever found. Incredibly, on March 12, 2009, similar strange footprints reappeared in Devon, reigniting the centuries-old mystery, Jeff the Talking Mongoose. In September 1931, the Irving family, living in a remote farmhouse on the Isle of Man, began hearing peculiar sounds, scratches, rustling, and growls coming from inside their walls. At first, they thought it was a rat, but the noises evolved into something much stranger. One day, the unseen creature introduced itself. It claimed to be a mongoose named Jeff, born in New Delhi, India, in 1852. According to the Irving's daughter, Vore, Jeff was small, about the size of a rat, with yellowish fur and a bushy tail. Jeff would alternate between playful and sinister. He once declared, "I am a freak. I have hands and feet, and if you saw me, you'd be petrified." While the family believed Jeff was real, skeptics suspected it was a hoax. Vore, who reportedly saw Jeff, was the most maintained until her death in 2005 that he was no fabrication. The disappearance of James Warson. On September 3, 1873, James Warson accepted a challenge to prove his bragging rights as a skilled runner. The goal was to complete a 20-mile trek between Leamington and Coventry, England. Warson's friends, Hammerson, Burns, and Barham Wise, followed closely behind in a horse-drawn carriage, with Burns carrying a camera to document the feat. All seemed normal until Warson, running down the road, suddenly stumbled. As he pitched forward, he let out a blood-curdling scream. But instead of hitting the ground, he vanished mid-fall, completely and inexplicably. Burns captured the aftermath. The soft dirt on the road showed Warson's footprints leading up to the spot, but then they simply ended. A search party scoured the area, but neither Warson nor any evidence of him was ever found. Even bloodhounds refused to approach the spot where he disappeared. The mysterious cries of Larry. On August 7, 1973, CB radio users across New Mexico were startled to hear desperate cries for help from a young boy. He identified himself as Larry, explaining he was trapped inside a red and white pickup truck with his father, who had suffered a fatal heart attack. Larry claimed their truck had flipped into a ravine during a rabbit hunting trip. With both doors jammed shut, he was unable to escape. His faint signal faded in and out over the next several days, and reports of his pleas were heard as far as California, Wyoming, and even Canada. Rescue teams scoured the Manzano Mountains in New Mexico, but no truck or boy was ever found. To add to the confusion, a helicopter pilot claimed to make contact with a boy calling himself David, not Larry. Despite numerous reports, police eventually called off the search, citing a lack of evidence. Some believe the incident was a hoax, but those who spoke to the boy insist his fear and desperation were genuine. The Isdal woman. On November 29, 1970, hikers in Norway's Isdalen Valley stumbled upon the charred remains of a woman. Her body was surrounded by sleeping pills and gasoline canisters. Strangely, all identifying marks, clothing labels, and fingerprints had been removed. Investigators traced her belongings to 2 suitcases at Bergen Station. Inside were cryptic items, a prescription lotion with the doctor's name removed, broken glasses with partial fingerprints, and 500 German marks hidden in the lining of a suitcase. The woman had used at least 9 aliases while traveling through Europe. Witnesses recalled she wore wigs, spoke multiple languages, and always stayed in hotel rooms with balconies. One man came forward decades later, claiming to have encountered the woman just days before her death. She was hiking inappropriately dressed and appeared terrified, silently followed by 2 men in black coats. The man didn't share his story for 32 years. saying a police officer told him, "Forget her. She was disposed of." The mystery of the Isdal woman remains unsolved to this day. Kevin Nguyen, 25, went missing in the early hours of December 9, 2018. According to his family, he was last seen at the Brass Rail on Broadway in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He was reportedly asked to leave the bar after an altercation. That was the last time anyone saw or heard from him. In the days that followed, Kevin's family, friends, and community members desperately searched for him. On Sunday, nearly 150 volunteers gathered at Lakeside Park to comb the area for any sign of him. Search efforts extended to the banks of the St. Joseph and St. Mary's rivers, as well as the area surrounding the Brass Rail. On Thursday, Kevin's broken glasses were discovered in the parking lot of the bar. His family noted that his vision was very poor, making it unlikely he could have navigated without them. This find deepened their concerns and cast a shadow over the search. Bar management disclosed that Kevin had entered the bar 4 times that evening. Video footage from a nearby Arby's showed Kevin walking past the restaurant twice, once around 1:40 a.m. and again at 2:45 a.m. Despite this evidence in the bar's surveillance footage, 2 years passed with no solid leads. Many believe Kevin may have accidentally fallen into the river due to his poor vision, but searches of the water turned up nothing. His body was never recovered, leaving his family with unanswered questions and fading hope. Michaela Lawrence. In 2002, 12-year-old Michaela Lawrence and her family were devastated when they received news that her father had died in a horrific car accident. The crash was so severe that his body was barely recognizable, and the family decided on a closed-casket funeral. But the tragedy didn't end there. Weeks after the funeral, strange packages began arriving at the Lawrence home. Each package was addressed to Michaela and contained small, seemingly insignificant items, trinkets, and knickknacks. The first was a model of Big Ben that Michaela's mother immediately recognized as something that had been in their home before. Then came an antique stopwatch from the 1950s, broken and unusable, but familiar to Michaela's mother. The packages arrived sporadically with no return address or indication of who had sent them. On Michaela's 13th birthday, a card arrived. It was signed, "Love, Mom and Dad," in her father's handwriting. Michaela's mother recognized the card as one they had gifted their daughter years earlier. This confirmed her growing suspicion that the items being sent were possessions from their home, her late husband's belongings. When she tried to check the family's safe for missing items, the combination no longer worked. The police could do little except advise the family to install security cameras. To this day, no one knows how these items were removed from their home or who sent them back. Frauke Liebs disappeared on June 20, 2006, in Paderborn, Germany, under circumstances that remain chillingly mysterious. That night, Frauke had gone out with friends to watch a World Cup soccer match at the Old Triangle Irish pub. Her mother dropped her off around 9 p.m., and Frauke exchanged texts with a friend until her phone battery died. She borrowed a phone battery from a friend, but returned it before leaving the pub at 11 p.m. With only $5 on her, it's assumed she intended to walk the short mile to her flat. But Frauke never arrived home. At 12:49 a.m., her flatmate Chris received a text from Frauke stating she would be back late. Over the following week, Frauke called Chris 5 times. The calls were brief, made during the evenings, and strangely cryptic. She reassured him that she would come back, but gave no clear answers about where she was or what had happened. During the last call, Frauke's sister asked if she was being held against her will. Frauke hesitated, then said yes, only to quickly correct herself, loudly saying no. After that, all contact ceased. Her body was found on October 4, 2006, in a remote wooded area, but no cause of death was determined. Police believe the calls were made from a car traveling through various industrial zones in Paderborn. Frauke's disappearance and death remain unsolved. Jack Wheeler, a prominent figure known for his work on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and in various government roles, vanished under mysterious circumstances in late December 2010. On December 28th, Jack was seen exiting an Amtrak train in Wilmington, Delaware. 2 days later, on December 30th, he was spotted wandering near Orange Street, disoriented and wearing only one shoe. Surveillance footage from earlier showed him at a parking garage, claiming his briefcase had been stolen. Witnesses said he appeared upset but refused offers of help. The following day, December 31st, Jack's body was discovered at the Cherry Island landfill. His death was ruled a homicide caused by blunt force trauma. Investigators determined that a garbage truck had picked up Jack's body from a dumpster in Newark, Delaware, near his home. Jack's strange behavior in the days leading up to his death, including his apparent confusion and agitation, has fueled speculation. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jack Wheeler in the hours before his death or who was responsible for his murder. Even more mysterious was the lighthouse log. It described strange events in the days leading up to their disappearance. One man had reportedly grown silent, another had wept uncontrollably, and all three seemed terrified by a looming storm. The log ended cryptically with the words, "The storm has passed, the skies are calm, God is over all." But records show there was no storm in the area at the time. The keepers were never seen again. The most accepted theory is that a rogue wave swept them into the sea, but questions remain. Why would experienced lighthouse keepers leave the safety of their station during dangerous weather? The mystery of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse endures, chilling visitors and historians alike. The deaths of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. In April 2014, two Dutch students, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, set off on a hike in the jungles near Boquete, Panama, while on a study abroad trip. They were excited for adventure, but they would never return. Days turned into weeks, and search parties scoured the area, finding no trace of the young women. Then 10 weeks later, a local woman found a backpack near a river. Inside were their belongings, passports, a camera, and 2 cell phones. When investigators examined the camera, they found an eerie sequence of photographs. The early photos were cheerful, showing the women enjoying their hike. But later images, taken days after their disappearance, were disturbing. Over 100 nighttime photos captured blurry rocks, trees, and what appeared to be the back of someone's head. Even more troubling were the records from their phones. For days, the women had tried to call emergency services but couldn't get a signal. Eventually, their calls stopped. Weeks later, scattered remains were found miles from the trail, including a boot with a foot still inside. The cause of death remains unknown. Did they succumb to the elements, or was someone else involved? To this day, the deaths of Chris and Lisanne remain a tragic and chilling mystery. The death of Kendrick Johnson on January 11, 2013, Kendrick Johnson, a 17-year-old high school student, was found dead inside a rolled-up gym mat in the gymnasium of Lowndes High School in Georgia. Authorities initially ruled his death an accident, suggesting Kendrick had fallen into the mat while trying to retrieve a shoe and suffocated. But Kendrick's family didn't believe this explanation. They requested a second autopsy, which revealed blunt force trauma to his head, a detail absent from the original report. Suspicion grew when bloodstains were found near the scene, yet no blood was reportedly found on Kendrick's body. Surveillance footage from the gym also appeared to be missing or tampered with. The case gained national attention, with many suspecting foul play and a potential cover-up. Despite years of protests and investigations, Kendrick's death remains unresolved, a painful mystery for his family and community. The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. In 1998, Amy Lynn Bradley, a 23-year-old woman from Virginia, disappeared while on a Caribbean cruise with her family aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. Amy was last seen early in the morning relaxing on the ship's deck. By sunrise, she was gone. Over the years, there have been chilling reports of sightings. In 1998, Canadian tourists claimed to have seen a woman resembling Amy on a beach in Curaçao, noting tattoos identical to hers. In 1999, a U.S. Navy sailor reported meeting a woman in a brothel who said her name was Amy Bradley and begged for help. Another possible sighting occurred in 2005, when a witness spotted a woman matching Amy's description in a department store in Barbados. Amy's family believes she may have been abducted and sold into human trafficking. They appeared on television shows, including Dr. Phil, pleading for answers. A photo emailed to the family in 2005 showed a woman resembling Amy in captivity, but nothing definitive has been found. Her disappearance remains a haunting and unresolved case. The disappearance of Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach, an experienced hiker and adventurer from Nevada, became obsessed with a mysterious cave he stumbled upon in the Mojave Desert. He called it the M Cave because its entrance resembled the letter M. According to Kenny, as he approached the cave, his body began to vibrate with an intensity he couldn't explain. Spooked, he left but vowed to return. Kenny recorded a YouTube video sharing his experience and promised to revisit the cave. On his second trip, he brought a camera but failed to find the cave. Undeterred, he ventured out a third time and never came back. Search teams later found his cell phone near an abandoned mine, but no trace of Kenny was ever discovered. Did he fall victim to the desert's harsh conditions, or was there something more sinister about the cave? Kenny's disappearance continues to fascinate conspiracy theorists and adventurers alike, adding to the eerie allure of the Mojave Desert. Each of these stories represents a thread of mystery, a glimpse into the unknown, and a chilling reminder of how fragile and fleeting life can be. The stalker in your inbox, Sandy McNulty's nightmare. Sandy McNulty was just 27 years old when she received the first unsettling email that would haunt her for weeks. Only a month after her divorce, she signed up for Match.com, hoping to start fresh. What came next wasn't a message from a potential suitor, but a chilling note from someone who claimed to know all about her recent breakup. The email addressed her by her full name and explained in a disturbingly familiar tone that the sender thought they would make a great couple. It felt strangely personal, as if the sender was watching her every move. But it wasn't just the message that unnerved Sandy, it was what came attached to it. The email included a file, one that made her blood run cold. She clicked on it, expecting perhaps a harmless photo or a joke, but instead it was a graphic and invasive image, a large, disturbing picture of a man's genitalia. Sandy's first thought was that it must be from her ex-husband, who had been known to act impulsively. But when she confronted him, he was adamant. It wasn't him. He was sincere, even apologetic, claiming that he would never do something like this. But the emails didn't stop. In fact, they grew worse. Each new message was more aggressive than the last, laced with anger and frustration. Sandy did her best to ignore them, hoping they would go away, but then the sender took things a step further. One evening, attached to an email, was a photo of the side of her house. Taken that very night. Panic set in. She knew she was being watched. In a desperate attempt to cut ties, Sandy blocked the sender's email address. The messages stopped, and for a while she thought it was over. But the identity of the mysterious stalker remained a chilling mystery. Was it her ex or someone else entirely? To this day, the true identity of the sender is unknown, but Sandy never let her guard down again. The fear of being watched, of being followed, haunted her every step. Download at your own risk the Reddit user's chilling files. But Sandy wasn't the only one to receive a terrifying email. Another person, a former Reddit user, shared his eerie experience in a post that would soon vanish from the internet. One day, he received a text from an unknown number, urging him to check his email immediately. He did, and found a subject line. In all caps, download this now. Inside the message was his full name, address, phone number, and 5 files attached. 4 of them were photos, one of his house, one of a young woman he later recognized as his mother, one of him as a baby, and a final image of a creepy, middle-aged man with an unsettling smile. The last attachment was an executable file titled "Download This Now." Terrified, the Reddit user didn't open the file. Instead, he reported the email to the police. The mystery of the files, what the exe file contained, remains unsolved. Within a month, his Reddit post was mysteriously deleted, as if it had never been there at all. In a quiet town in New York, Father David received an email that would forever alter his perception of the digital world. The email had no subject line, and when he opened it, his computer immediately crashed. He tried to reboot, but nothing worked. After multiple attempts, he finally logged on, only to find that all of his files were gone. Worse still, the wallpaper on his screen was a disturbing, hyper-realistic image of Satan himself. As if that weren't enough, distorted laughing noises began to echo from his speakers, sending chills down his spine. Was it a cruel prank by a hacker, or something darker? In 2009, an unsettling virus outbreak spread across the internet, disguised as seemingly innocent promotional emails. Some offered 40% off at Target, others claimed to be free gift cards. But when users opened them, a virus was installed on their computers without their consent, silently monitoring their activity. The virus often activated webcams, spying on users as they went about their day, completely unaware. No one could figure out how it spread or how to stop it. Fortunately, the virus swarm eventually died down, but not before it left a lasting fear of being watched through our screens. The Deceptive Dean, Jen's terrifying encounter. And then there was the story of Jen, a high school freshman whose unsettling experience would stay with her forever. Jen was a pretty popular girl who caught the attention of boys her age and much older men. One day she received an email from the school dean telling her that her grades could be improved and that they needed to discuss it. At the bottom of the email, there was a strange note: do not respond. A week later, another email came asking her to meet the dean behind the school at 7 a.m. before classes started. Curious, Jen went to the school early one morning. As she approached the back of the building, she saw a figure peeking out from behind a dumpster. It wasn't the dean, it was a stranger. Terrified, she ran home, and her parents immediately reported it to the school. The dean had never sent the emails. They were traced back to a website that allowed people to send anonymous, fake messages. Even more disturbingly, the computer used to send them was traced to the farthest corner of the local library, a place where the mysterious phone call at USC. In 2015, Michael Andrews, a student at the University of Southern California, was heading out to a party with his roommate Steve. As they left their dorm, Steve suddenly realized he had forgotten his phone inside, but by then they were already on their way in an Uber to the off-campus party. They shrugged it off and continued their ride, thinking nothing of it. The night seemed like any other typical college party, but things would soon take a strange and unsettling turn. As Michael mingled with friends, his phone rang. It was Steve's number flashing across the screen. Michael answered, expecting to hear his roommate, but what he heard was far from normal. On the other end of the line, Steve's voice crackled through a haze of static. Despite the loud music in the background, Michael could clearly make out the words, "Come back to the room," before the call ended abruptly. Michael, confused but not yet alarmed, decided to leave the party and Uber back to the dorm to check on Steve. He called and texted him repeatedly, but no response came. When he returned to the dorm, he was shocked to find Steve's phone sitting on his bed as though it had been left there intentionally. Michael checked the phone. His texts and calls were displayed on the screen, but there was no sign of Steve. The San Francisco Chronicle received a mysterious postcard from the Zodiac Killer, the infamous serial killer who had terrorized the region in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The postcard didn't directly reference Donna, but it hinted that the killer had buried his 12th victim in Lake Tahoe. A chilling connection was made between the disappearance of Donna and the Zodiac Killer's cryptic message. A search of the area yielded nothing, but what made this case even unnerving was that the Zodiac Killer was not known to hide bodies. This meant there could be someone else involved in Donna's disappearance. And the most terrifying thought of all, the chilling possibility that the Zodiac Killer had claimed yet another victim, or worse, that he was playing a twisted game by planting cryptic clues. As time passed, Donna's fate remained an unresolved and terrifying mystery. The mysterious disappearance of Brendan Swanson. In 2008, 19-year-old Brendan Swanson was driving home late at night after a party in Minnesota when disaster struck. He lost control of his car, sending it crashing into a ditch on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. Stranded and knowing how dangerous his situation was, Brendan called his parents for help. Desperate to find him, they asked him for directions. He told them that he could see lights from a nearby town and was heading in that direction. It seemed like a simple plan to get him to safety. However, when Brendan's parents arrived at the location he described, they found nothing. No car, no sign of Brendan. Panic set in as they continued to talk with him on the phone, but every time they thought they were close, Brendan's directions seemed to make less and less sense. Terrified, he decided to backdial the number. An old man answered, confused and unaware of what was going on. Each time he didn't answer the phone, the calls would persist, coming in again and again. Finally, in desperation, he canceled his phone contract and switched providers, hoping that would solve the problem. But the calls continued. His worst fear had come true. Nothing seemed to stop the horrifying static and screaming. He backdialed once more, and this time he got a different person on the line. After a series of strange and unnerving events, Stacy's brother lost his job and eventually his phone. It was then that the calls finally stopped, or so they thought. One day, Stacy's mom received a voicemail. The static and screaming were back, louder than ever. Stacy's brother immediately dialed the number once again, only to find it disconnected. And with that, the terrifying ordeal came to an end. but the question remained. In the 1970s, Bashir Koshaki, a successful restaurateur in Washington, D.C., the mysterious caller would ring him several times a day, speaking in cryptic, unsettling voices. Over time, the caller began to mimic the voice of a little girl, becoming more and more disturbing. It wasn't long before Kawashaki's family, friends, and employees were also harassed by this haunting voice. The name Lontun Font, meaning the child in French, Obs for French, was eventually coined by investigators to refer to the caller. The harassment escalated from eerie phone calls to more sinister acts, like scratching Star of David symbols on Koshaki's car. The stress and pressure of this psychological torment became too much, and Koshaki eventually suffered a breakdown and committed himself to a psychiatric ward. But the calls didn't stop. They continued to plague him, now coming from different payphones, making it impossible to trace the source. The FBI eventually discovered that the calls were not the work of one person, but a group of individuals conspiring to drive Kawasaki to madness. In 1931, William Wallace, an insurance agent in London, found himself at the center of a chilling mystery. Wallace made the trip only to find that the address provided didn't exist. Thinking little of it, he returned home, likely assuming it was some prank. But when he arrived, he was greeted by a grisly scene. The mysterious caller immediately became the prime suspect, but a shocking twist emerged during the investigation. The police suggested that Wallace himself had staged the call in order to create an alibi for the murder he had committed. They argued that Wallace had killed his wife, left to make the phone call, and then returned home to find her body. However, this theory fell apart when it was shown that Wallace couldn't have returned to his home in time to commit the murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence that exonerated him, Wallace was still convicted. But fate intervened when the Court of Criminal Appeal overturned the conviction. The true killer was never found, in the mysterious caller. The one who had led Wallace to his wife's murder was never identified. The phone call that set the entire case into motion remains a haunting riddle that still haunts the case. The mysterious Tanya Alexander Jason Alexander had no idea that when he and his family began receiving calls for a woman named Tanya, they would soon find themselves at the center of an eerie, unresolved mystery. It started with innocent missed dials, wrong numbers that seemed harmless enough. But over time, the calls grew increasingly frequent, and each one seemed to reference a different part of the area. Tanya's name was everywhere until one day the call stopped completely. Years later, Jason had settled into a new life in a new city, and he'd nearly forgotten about Tanya. That is, until he stumbled across a terrifying car accident one rainy evening. The car involved was registered to Tanya, but when police arrived, there was no sign of her anywhere. She had simply vanished. Days later, police contacted Jason asking if Tanya had ever stayed with him, as her car had been found abandoned in the area. Tanya was never found, and the strange series of calls continued to haunt Jason. Was this a twisted coincidence, or was something far more sinister at play? And who was Tanya? The bizarre case of Judith Hyams. In 1965, Judith Hyams, a young woman from Coral Gables, Florida, was pregnant and seeking an abortion. Little did she know this would lead her to the brink of a mystery that would haunt investigators for decades. Judith visited a Hungarian doctor named George Heido for a secret procedure. But tragically, she disappeared. Her car was later found in Atlanta with blood in the back seat, but there was no trace of her. Years later, a radio host from Omaha, Nebraska, made a strange call to Captain Chuck Smith of the Coral Gables Police Department, claiming to know something about Judith's case. This bizarre call led to more strange, unexplained calls, which hinted at Judith being alive in Omaha, though no hard evidence was ever found. Was Judith alive, or had something more horrific happened? This chilling mystery remains unsolved. On Christmas Day in 1996, 32-year-old Patty Vaughn left her home and was never seen again. Her car was found abandoned 15 miles away from her house, but there was no sign of Patty anywhere. The only eerie clues left behind were bloodstains scattered across her home and the chilling realization that her 3 children had been playing inside when she vanished. The children, absorbed in their games, didn't even notice that their mother was missing until hours later. And by that time, it was too late. Despite extensive searches, Patty's body was never discovered, leaving her disappearance an unsolved mystery that haunted the town for years. Was it a random act of violence, or was something far darker at play in the quiet town of Lavernia? The Merlin family mystery, Santa, the disappearance of a young boy. In 2001, a seemingly innocent Christmas party in Denver turned into a chilling tale of disappearances. A Santa Claus had been hired anonymously to distribute presents to the children, spreading holiday cheer among the festive crowd. But when the partygoers looked closer, they saw something that sent a shiver down their spines. The Santa whispered something into the ear of one of the Merlin family's young sons while he sat on his lap. The boy, no older than 8, appeared confused, and after the Santa's sudden departure, the boy was never seen again. Hours later, it was discovered that the Santa himself had vanished, leaving behind only a trail of mystery. Was the man dressed as Santa connected to the boy's disappearance? Or was this strange figure something far more sinister, a manifestation of something otherworldly? The murder of Tracy. Tracy, who had recently moved to Rochdale from Birmingham with her boyfriend, Joey Kavanagh, returned to her old flat on December 23rd to gather some personal items. 2 men barged into the flat, abducting Tracy and taking her to the small town of Eaton. There, they placed her in front of a church, set her on fire, and left her to die. Tragically, Tracy managed to stay conscious long enough to repeat a chilling question the men had asked her. Despite the haunting nature of her last words, Joey denied knowing anything about the men or why they would target his family. The brutal murder, the unanswered question, and the strange circumstances surrounding Tracy's final moments left a community forever haunted. The murder of Rhonda Hinson. On December 22, 1981, Rhonda Hinson, a 19-year-old woman, attended a company Christmas party, never to return home. That night, she was shot while sitting in her car, the bullet passing through the trunk and driver's seat before fatally striking her in the heart. What made Rhonda's death so unsettling was the strange figure spotted near her car shortly before her murder, a mysterious man. Even more unsettling was the fact that Rhonda had acted strangely in the days leading up to her death. Was this a random act of violence? Or was Rhonda's death the result of a dark secret that someone was trying to keep buried? In the 1960s and 70s, the town of Warminster, England, became infamous for a series of UFO sightings. But it wasn't just strange flying objects that captivated the town's attention. It was the terrifying, unexplainable sounds that echoed across the countryside. The most infamous of these incidents involved Marjorie By, who was walking home from a Christmas church service when she suddenly collapsed, overwhelmed by a strange vibrating noise. She described the experience as if invisible fingers were pressing down on her, paralyzing her. The force was so intense that it left her with permanent damage, and she was never able to fully recover from the incident. No one ever explained the strange sounds that plagued Warminster, and many were left wondering, was something truly supernatural at work? Or was this just the beginning of something far more sinister? The disappearance of Nicole Mertens. Tragedy struck again for the Mertens family when Jared Mertens, after losing his wife Susan in a car accident, remarried and moved away with his daughter Nicole. However, the location of their new home was kept a secret from both his family and his late wife's family. Soon after the move, Nicole vanished without a trace. Despite the police investigation, she was never found. Then 2 decades later, Jared and his new wife Barbara were discovered dead in what appeared to be a double suicide. The only clue left behind was a note that read, "We are sorry for everything we've done." Was Nicole's disappearance linked to her father's mysterious new life? Was it possible that Jared and Barbara knew more about her fate than they let on, or had their tragic end been the result of something far darker? The Arkansas Santa Claus gift. In 2007, in a small town in Arkansas, a mysterious man dressed as Santa Claus began leaving strange gifts on the porches of unsuspecting residents. At first, it seemed like a harmless holiday prank until the gifts began to reveal a darker side. 5 of the packages contained nothing but old, useless toys, while 1 package contained papers, many of which were written by authors from the 80s and 90s. But among the papers was a single note with large, unsettling writing. "I'm sorry for whatever happens to your son." 2 years later, Jamie Freshner's son, Chris, was struck by a car while riding his bike, suffering fatal injuries. The driver fled the scene, never to be identified, leaving Jamie and her family wondering if the mysterious Santa had known something they didn't. Was this an eerie coincidence, or had the Santa Claus been some kind of messenger, warning them of the terrible fate that awaited their son? The murder of Latricia White. In December of 1994, Latricia White's Christmas holiday was tragically cut short. She had been spending time with her boyfriend, Lee Wackerhagen, and his 9-year-old son when things took a terrifying turn. Lee had been scheduled to drop his son off at his mother's house for the holidays, but instead he kept him with him for a few more days. Then, just days later, Latricia was found dead in their apartment, a victim of what appeared to be foul play. Lee and his son were nowhere to be found, and the police suspected that Lee had murdered Latricia before fleeing with his son. Despite extensive investigations, neither Lee nor his son were ever found, and the case remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries, leaving many to wonder whether Lee's disappearance was the result of something far more sinister than a simple domestic dispute. The Elephant Man. In 2015, 24-year-old Michael Miller and his friends were hosting a Halloween party at the house they rented together. Michael recalls inviting around 40 people and asking their friends to bring others, which led to a crowd of about 40 guests. At most Halloween parties, people usually don't keep their masks on the entire time unless it's part of their costume. Even when masks are worn, it's common for people to take them off for a break at some point during the night. That's why Michael and his housemates found it strange when one man showed up dressed in regular clothes but wearing a gruesome Elephant Man mask. He sat in a chair all night doing nothing, which made some guests feel uneasy. No one knew who he was, so Michael eventually approached him and asked his name. The man replied, "Billy," in a deep voice. Michael didn't recognize him and asked him to remove the mask, but the man refused. After a brief exchange, Michael asked him to leave, and the man complied. Later that night, 2 girls at the party passed out, likely due to being slipped Rohypnol, and the masked man became a suspect. Even stranger, 2 neighboring homes were broken into and robbed that same night. Though it's not certain that the masked man was involved in these events, it seems like a strong possibility. Cindy Sung, a 21-year-old South Korean student at Penn State University, attended a Halloween party at a nightclub in 2001. She spent several hours at the club, leaving around 2 a.m., and heading to a friend's apartment. After hanging out with friends, she was dropped off at her own apartment at 4 a.m. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Cindy was reported missing, her apartment showed no signs of foul play, and her belongings were found inside, including her fake eyelashes, backpack, and cell phone. The only things missing were her purse and wallet, suggesting she may have left the apartment again. A witness later reported seeing a woman resembling Cindy in the Chinatown district of Philadelphia. She was in a vehicle with a man and appeared to be crying for help. In 2003, Hugo Marcus Zielinski was arrested after the remains of 5 people were discovered buried in his yard. He confessed to abducting Cindy with another man, Michael Korkowski Jr., keeping her imprisoned until she died, then burying her remains on the property. However, Cindy's body was never identified among the remains, and Korkowski, the only person who could confirm this, was also found buried on the property. The case remains unsolved. Chris Jenkins. On Halloween night in 2002, 21-year-old Chris Jenkins, a University of Minnesota student, went to a keg party before heading to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in downtown Minneapolis. Around 10:30 p.m., Chris was kicked out of the bar for being too drunk, and he was banned from returning. It was a cold night with temperatures dipping to 20 degrees, and Chris was left outside wearing only his Native American costume, without his wallet, phone, or keys. He disappeared shortly after, and no one heard from him. The area around the bar was known for high crime, and Chris's family hired a private investigator. Witnesses later reported seeing a large group of men attacking a lone individual near the bar, possibly as part of a gang initiation. Tracking dogs picked up Chris's scent, which led to a nearby parking garage where a few drops of blood and a red feather belonging to Chris's costume were found. However, the trail ended there. 4 months later, Chris's body was discovered floating in the Mississippi River. Initially believed to be an accidental drowning or suicide, but the cause of death was later changed to homicide. Bradley. In 2007, 12-year-old Bradley was trick-or-treating with friends in Colorado. At some point, his friends realized he was missing. After retracing their steps, they found his cowboy hat by the curb, and further up the road, his bag of candy spilled on the street. But Bradley was nowhere to be found. The boys' search for him led nowhere, and it's unclear how Bradley disappeared. 1 week later, his mother discovered his glasses in the backyard, which was strange because his friends had said he was wearing them when they last saw him, implying he might have returned home at some point. The case remains unsolved. David Stone, a successful stock market analyst, had a stable career and was known for being a bright and level-headed young man. But just before Halloween in 1980, an argument at a party led him to leave in a strange state. Witnesses saw him walking along a highway and even encountered him on a farmer's property, severely underdressed for the cold, muttering about searching for the beast. David disappeared into the desert and was last seen on Halloween Day. His car was found several days later, and search teams found strange rock formations and other bizarre clues that seemed to hint at something cryptic. 4 years later, in 1962, hikers found his remains in the desert. Despite the odd circumstances surrounding his behavior, no foul play was suspected. David Berkowitz. In 1981, Ronald Seisman and Elizabeth Platzman were brutally murdered in their Greenwich Village apartment. Initially, it was believed to be drug-related. But the case took a strange turn when an informant from prison claimed that David Berkowitz, the infamous Son of Sam killer, had predicted the murders weeks before they occurred. According to the informant, Berkowitz said a cult planned to murder a couple in a similar fashion as his earlier killings. While Berkowitz made this claim, there was no evidence to support it, and the murders of Ronald and Elizabeth remain unsolved. Jane's unsettling encounter with Jeremy. The first photo you're about to see was taken by a woman named Jane, who met a man named Jeremy through a dating app. After a recent breakup, Jane felt ready to give dating a try again. She had been swiping through profiles and chatting with a few people before matching with Jeremy. He seemed like someone she could comfortably connect with. Jane describes herself as shy and reserved, though she considers herself good-looking, while Jeremy appeared to be her type, a guy with a buzz cut, a full tattoo sleeve, and a love for the outdoors. One of his pictures even showed him with his dog in the bed of his pickup truck, parked in the woods. They struck up a conversation about dogs, which eventually led to talking about local bars they frequented. Jeremy picked Jane up, and they went to a bar called Lansdowne Street, where they seemed to hit it off. Afterward, Jeremy dropped her off at home but seemed hesitant to end the night, even suggesting she come back to his place. Jane politely declined, and that was the end of their first date. They texted for the next few days and met again the following Friday for fast food and ice cream. After chatting in his car, Jeremy took Jane to his house, where he once again tried to get her to come inside. She repeatedly refused, but his persistence grew uncomfortable, even becoming physical at one point. Jane wasn't sure if he was trying to force her out of the car or make an unwanted advance, but she managed to shove his hands away and left the car, walking briskly down the street. Jeremy tried calling, but Jane ignored him, eventually having her older brother Chris come to pick her up. After a tense exchange of text messages, Jeremy cursed Jane out, but then quickly switched to apologizing. Jane, sensing something off, blocked him, convinced that he wasn't as he appeared and might even be dangerous. Now, here's where the photo comes in. That night, Jane was woken up by the sound of her recycling bin being kicked outside her window. It was late, so she got out of bed to check. When she peeked outside, she saw something that made her stomach turn. Jeremy was standing in the dark, wearing a hood and facing her window. Jane, managing to stay calm, took a photo of him. He noticed her and tried to open the window, shouting her name. In a panic, she screamed for her brothers and dad to help. By the time they reacted, Jeremy had fled, his truck's engine roaring as he sped away. Jane, determined not to engage further, filed a police report the next day and obtained a restraining order, using the photo and text as evidence. She sent a copy of the order to Jeremy, but never unblocked him, so he never responded. What Jeremy intended to do outside her window is unclear, but after his creepy behavior and the disturbing messages, it's hard to assume he was anything but dangerous. His actions suggested a troubling obsession with Jane that was only escalating. Anatoly Moskvin and his macabre doll. Next, you'll see a disturbing image of one of the many dolls made by Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian former journalist and college professor with a deep obsession with cemeteries. As a child, Anatoly started exploring cemeteries with his friends, eventually developing a fascination with the dead. Over time, this grew into a morbid hobby of collecting dolls, which became a disturbing obsession. He began digging up corpses and turning them into life-size dolls. Yes, the doll in the photo is made from a real human body. Anatoly's bizarre creations were mostly made from the bodies of young girls, aged 3 to 12, and he would dress them up with makeup and lipstick. He even marked their birthdays in his bedroom. He believed he could bring these children back to life, either through science or black magic, and often wrote about kissing them and caring for them as if they were his companions or even lovers. He would dry the bodies with salt and baking soda, store them in secure locations, and eventually bring them home to preserve and rebuild their bodies in his twisted belief that he could somehow restore life to them. It wasn't until police became suspicious of the growing number of defiled graves that Anatoly's actions were discovered. When his house was searched, they found 26 life-size dolls, mummified corpses, in fact, scattered throughout his home. At first, no one suspected that the dolls were actually bodies, but Anatoly openly confessed to the horrifying truth. Anatoly's parents, who lived with him, claimed they had no idea what he was doing. They believed his doll-making hobby was just a quirky interest, not realizing the disturbing reality behind it. Anatoly never apologized to the victims' families, instead justifying his actions by claiming that he was helping these children. Ultimately, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and is now confined to a psychiatric hospital. Amy Reeves and the stalker who followed her. Lastly, we come to the story behind a seemingly innocent picture of Amy Reeves and her baby sister, taken during Halloween. Amy had recently moved from Houston to a small town near Galveston, Texas, hoping for a peaceful life away from the city. However, she quickly began to notice something unsettling. Every time she left her house, a car would follow her. Initially, she ignored it, but as it happened repeatedly, she grew more concerned. One day, she took a different route home, hoping to lose the car. Despite her efforts, the car still followed her, flashing its lights aggressively. She eventually made it home, thinking she was safe, only to see the same car pull into a driveway across the street. The man inside revved his engine, confirming that this was no coincidence. She was being stalked. Amy called the police, who arrived and spoke to the man. However, when Amy went inside, she realized she had accidentally left her back door unlocked earlier that day. Later, while in her bathroom, Amy heard footsteps approaching her bedroom. She quickly locked the bathroom door, but when she peeked outside, she saw a police officer struggling with something in the yard. She then heard an aggressive knock on the wall, separating her bathroom from the bedroom. The stalker had entered her house. Amy managed to escape the house and look for the police, only to find their squad car empty. As she returned, she found one of the officers injured, seemingly attacked by the stalker. The man was eventually arrested for assaulting an officer and fleeing the scene. Amy later discovered that the picture of her and her sister, which she had thought was innocent, had been taken by the stalker while passing by her house, days before the stalking incident even began. Michael Andrews and the mysterious call. In 2015, Michael Andrews, a student at the University of Southern California, was out with his roommate Steve, heading to a frat party off campus. The night began like any other, until Steve realized he had forgotten his phone back in their dorm. Despite being in an Uber already, they chose to continue their journey without turning back. During the party, the two friends separated to mingle with others. As Michael stood among the crowd, his phone rang, the caller ID showing Steve's number. Expecting a quick word, Michael answered, but instead, all he could hear was static. Through the distorted noise, he could make out a voice that unmistakably belonged to Steve. "Come back to the room," the voice said urgently, before the call abruptly ended. Worried, Michael left the party and took an Uber back to the dorms, desperately calling and texting Steve, but there was no response. When he arrived, he found the dorm eerily quiet. Steve was nowhere to be found. Strangely, Steve's phone was sitting on Michael's bed, its screen displaying a list of missed texts and calls. An hour later, Steve returned confused and concerned. He claimed he had never made the call. Even more disturbingly, Steve's phone had no record of the call, while Michael's showed a brief 15-second conversation. No one could trace the call or explain what had happened. The mystery of the phone call and Steve's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. Donna Lass and the Zodiac Killer's cryptic message. In 1970, Donna Lass, a 25-year-old nurse, worked at a first aid station at a casino in South Lake Tahoe, California. One day, Donna's boss and landlord received strange phone calls from an unidentified man, claiming Donna had to leave town due to a family illness. Suspicious, Donna's boss contacted her mother only to discover that the story was a lie. Donna's car was found parked outside her apartment, but there was no sign of her. The last clue was a logbook entry made during her final shift, unfinished, as though someone had interrupted her. 6 months later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a mysterious postcard, another cryptic message from the Zodiac Killer. Although there was no direct mention of Donna, the killer hinted that he had murdered and buried his 12th victim in Lake Tahoe. The connection between the postcard and Donna's disappearance was eerie and undeniable. A search of the area turned up nothing, and the Zodiac Killer, known for his taunting messages, had no reputation for hiding bodies. Donna's fate remains a chilling unknown, and the true identity of her captor or killer has never been revealed. Brendan Swanson and the terrifying last call. In 2008, 19-year-old Brendan Swanson was driving home after a night out when he crashed his car into a ditch on a desolate gravel road in Minnesota. Knowing how dangerous his situation was, he called his parents for help. They began driving to his location, but when they arrived at the spot he described, there was no sign of his car. Frustrated, they called Brendan again. Over the phone, Brendan described seeing lights from a nearby town and claimed he was heading in that direction. But suddenly, as his father was about to scold him for swearing, Brendan's voice cut off mid-sentence. There was a loud noise followed by silence. The call ended abruptly, and no one heard from Brendan again. Despite hundreds of volunteers and dozens of dogs searching the area, only his car was found. What happened in those final moments? What did Brendan see or hear that caused him to stop talking? The mystery of his disappearance remains unsolved, and the chilling last moments of that phone call still haunt his family to this day. The static, screaming calls. A Reddit user named Stacy Kalupski shared the terrifying experience of her brother, who received strange calls in the dead of night. Every night around 2 to 3 a.m., his phone would ring, and when he answered, he would hear nothing but a disturbing noise, static mixed with screaming. It was a sound that chilled him to the bone. After a month of this, he changed his phone number, hoping it would end. For a brief time it did, but then the calls started again, at the exact same time, with the same horrific noise. In desperation, he decided to backdial the number. An old man answered, bewildered and confused, insisting he had no idea what the caller was talking about. But this didn't stop the calls. Terrified, he switched to a new phone company and changed his number again. And just like before, the static screaming calls resumed. One night, in a final act of defiance, he backdialed the number once more, only to hear a different person on the line, equally confused. Soon after, he lost his job and, with it, his phone. The call stopped, but then something even more chilling occurred. Stacy's mother received a strange message on her home phone. The same static screaming noise was there. Her brother's fear reached a breaking point, and when he backdialed the number again, it had been disconnected. The calls never came again, but the mystery lingered. Who was making the calls and why? What was their purpose? The terror of those screams still echoes in their minds. L'Enfant's harassment. In the 1970s, Bashir Kaushaki opened a thriving restaurant in Washington, D.C. For over a decade. Everything was successful until, in 1983, he became the target of relentless phone harassment. The calls came multiple times a day, every day, filled with bizarre, taunting messages. The caller was eventually dubbed L'Enfant, a name that referenced the creepy imitation of a child's voice. At first, the harassment seemed like a minor annoyance, but it quickly escalated. The calls turned physical when Koshaki's car was vandalized. And soon it became apparent that this was no random act. Whoever was behind the calls was after more than just torment. They were trying to break him. The harassment continued for years with no signs of stopping. Even the FBI was involved, tracing the calls only to find they were coming from various payphones, making it impossible to pinpoint a single culprit. As the years wore on, the calls evolved into a full-on campaign to drive Koshaki to madness. The motivation behind the harassment remained unknown. Who were these people, and why were they tormenting Koshaki? The mystery surrounding L'Enfant remains unsolved, with the sinister phone calls continuing to haunt him for nearly a decade. William Wallace and the mysterious caller. In 1931, William Wallace, a London insurance agent, was known for his love of chess. One evening after a regular chess club meeting, he received a mysterious phone message from a person asking to meet him the next night to purchase an insurance policy. When Wallace arrived at the address given to him, it led to an empty lot. Convinced it was a prank, he returned home. But when he walked through the door, he was met with the horrifying sight of his wife Julia brutally murdered in the living room. The mysterious caller became the prime suspect, but when the police began investigating, they uncovered a shocking twist. It was William Wallace himself who had left the message, likely to create an alibi. The investigation suggested that Wallace murdered his wife, then staged his alibi by traveling across town. However, the time frame didn't make sense. There was no way Wallace could have committed the murder and returned so quickly. The jury still found Wallace guilty, but fortunately, the Court of Criminal Appeal overturned. The true killer was never identified, but some suspect a former employee of Wallace's insurance firm, seen wearing bloody gloves and cleaning his car on the night of the murder. Tanya Alexander's mysterious disappearance. Jason Alexander's family began receiving strange phone calls years before the disappearance of a woman named Tanya. Tanya shared the same last name as Jason's family, and her calls seemed innocent enough at first. It was a common name in their area, so they didn't think much of it. But the calls continued, sometimes daily, for years. Eventually, the calls stopped as Jason's family moved and phone books became obsolete. It was easy to forget Tanya, until one afternoon Jason drove home to find a terrible car wreck right near his house. One of the cars had slammed into a signpost, wrapping itself around it. But as Jason looked closer, he froze. The signpost was marked with his own house number. A few days later, Jason received a call from the police. They were asking if Tanya was at his home. Her car. They were asking if Tanya was at his home. Her car had been found near the wreck, but there was no sign of her. Jason had never heard from Tanya again, and he had no idea how her car had ended up near his house. What connection did Tanya have to his family? Was her disappearance linked to that strange car wreck? The mystery of Tanya Alexander remains unsolved, her story forever entangled with the strange events surrounding Jason's life. Judith Hyams and the Unsolved Mystery. In 1965, Judith Hyams disappeared from her hometown of Coral Gables, Florida. Her abandoned car, stained with blood. Blood was found in Atlanta, but there was no sign of Judith. As the investigation began, a bizarre detail emerged. The key to her house, which was left at a nearby gas station, inexplicably disappeared the night of her disappearance. 3 months later, Judith's phone bill revealed several untraceable phone calls to different states, places where she had never been. But what disturbed investigators the most were the strange, indecipherable messages left on the answering machine of her parents' house. Who had been calling her? And where was Judith? Her whereabouts remain unknown. Her story has never been solved. The mysterious calls from Judith's phone may have been an important clue, but they were lost forever when the phone company failed to trace them. Brian Schaffer, a medical student at Ohio State University, disappeared on April 1st, 2006, in what remains one of the most baffling missing person cases in recent history. That night, Brian went out with friends to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a bar near campus. At around 10 p.m., he called his girlfriend to tell her he loved her. Security cameras later captured Brian entering the bar and stepping outside to chat with 2 women. He was last seen re-entering the bar just before closing time. Brian's friends waited for him at the exit, but he never came out. Security footage showed no sign of him leaving the bar. Despite extensive searches, Brian has never been found. Some theorize he left through an unmonitored back exit, but there's no evidence to support this. Others believe foul play may be involved. Adding to the mystery, Brian's phone rang several times in the weeks following his disappearance, but no one answered. To this day, Brian Schaffer's disappearance remains unsolved, leaving his loved ones with no answers and only questions. In a shocking violation of privacy, an anonymous user on 4chan began posting hundreds of private, never-before-seen photos of celebrities in a massive leak known as the Fappening. These photos were stolen from hacked iCloud accounts, with the victims being high-profile female celebrities like Jennifer Lawrence, Scarlett Johansson, Kim Kardashian, and Kate Upton, among others. Apple later confirmed that these images were obtained through targeted attacks, although details about the hackers, including how many were involved, remain unclear. The FBI launched an investigation into the breach, but for many, the damage was already done, an unsettling reminder of the vulnerabilities of digital security. In one of Mexico's darkest unresolved tragedies, 43 high school students vanished in 2014 after being stopped by local police on their way to a protest. Investigators later claimed that the students had been handed over to a drug cartel, who likely murdered them. Yet, their bodies were never found, leaving grieving families and the public in limbo. Over 80 people, including a mayor, his wife, and a police chief, were arrested in connection to the case, but without concrete evidence, the mystery persists. The disappearance remains a harrowing symbol of corruption and violence in Mexico. The enigma of the Dighton Rock, sitting along the Taunton River in Massachusetts, the Dighton Rock has puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries. This 40-ton boulder is covered with petroglyphs, intricate carvings of unknown origin. First documented by English colonists in 1680, the glyphs have been studied endlessly, with most scholars attributing them to Native Americans. However, more speculative theories suggest they might have been created by Portuguese explorers, Chinese voyagers, or even the ancient Phoenicians. In 1963, the rock was removed for preservation, but its cryptic carvings continue to spark debate, with no definitive answers in sight. The Green Children of Woolpit, one of England's most bizarre legends, tells the story of two children who mysteriously appeared in the village of Woolpit, Suffolk, in the 12th century. Their skin had a greenish tint, and they spoke an unrecognizable language. The boy and girl refused to eat anything except raw beans, but over time, their diet expanded and their green hue faded. When they learned English, they revealed that they came from a shadowy land called St. Martin, where the sun barely rose above the horizon. Some theories suggest they were malnourished children, while others propose far stranger origins, like parallel dimensions or extraterrestrial beings. The truth remains lost to history. The cryptic death of Ricky McCormick. On June 30th, 1999, Ricky McCormick's body was discovered in a Missouri field, just 3 days after he went missing. Oddly, his body was severely decomposed despite the short time frame. Even stranger were the 2 handwritten notes found in his pockets, containing a mysterious code that no one, not even the FBI's top cryptographers, has been able to decipher. Ricky, a high school dropout who struggled with basic literacy, seemed an unlikely candidate to have written such a complex cipher. To this day, the notes remain an unsolved enigma, leaving his death shrouded in mystery. The Bear Brook murders. In 1980, a metal drum containing the bodies of a woman and a young girl was discovered near Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire. Investigators later determined the two were related but were unable to identify them. 15 years later, another drum was found just 100 feet away, holding the remains of 2 more young girls. One was related to the victims from the first drum, while the fourth bore no connection to the others. The bodies had deteriorated so badly that authorities estimated the murders might have occurred as early as 1907. Decades later, the victims' identities and the killer remain unknown. The Highway of Tears, British Columbia's Highway 16, has tragically earned the nickname the Highway of Tears due to the alarming number of women who have been murdered or gone missing along its remote stretches. Between 1969 and 2006, 18 women, some as young as 12 years old, disappeared or were killed on this road. American serial killer Bobby Jack Fowler, who died in 2006, is suspected of being responsible for 3 of the killings, but the majority remain unsolved. For the families of the victims, justice remains elusive, the mysterious Solder's family fire. On Christmas Eve 1945, a fire destroyed the home of George and Jenny Solder in Fayetteville, West Virginia. 5 of their 10 children were presumed dead, yet no remains were ever found in the ashes, a fact that puzzled experts, as burning flesh would have produced a detectable smell. Despite this, the fire was ruled an accident caused by faulty wiring. Over the years, the Solders received strange hints that their children might still be alive, including a cryptic photograph in 1968 of a man resembling one of their sons, postmarked from Kentucky. They hired a private investigator, but he vanished without a trace. To this day, the fate of the Solder children remains a chilling mystery. The Gilgo Beach Killer. Long Island's Gilgo Beach became the focus of a horrifying investigation when the remains of at least 10 victims, possibly as many as 17, were discovered between 2010 and 2011. Many of the victims were sex workers, but among them was an unidentified toddler. The killings, which spanned from 1977 to 2013, were linked to an unidentified serial killer dubbed the Gilgo Beach Killer. In 2009, detectives allegedly spoke to the killer by phone and traced the call to Times Square, but he evaded capture. Even after years of investigation, the killer remains at large, and the case haunts New York's unsolved crime files. The disappearance of the Sarah Jo crew. In the late 1970s, a young man named Robert Malakani purchased a modest 17-foot motorboat, which he lovingly named Sarah Jo after his parents, Sarah and Joe. In 1979, Robert and 4 friends, healthy, young, and full of life, took the boat out to sea from Maui, Hawaii. What was meant to be a simple day of fishing turned into a decades-long mystery when neither the boat nor the men returned. For years, there was no trace of what had happened to the Sarah Jo or its crew. Then, in 1908, nearly a decade later, the boat was discovered on the shores of Taongi, one of the smallest and most remote of the Marshall Islands, over 2,000 miles from Maui. Alongside the boat, a shallow grave was found containing the skeletal remains of one of the missing fishermen, later identified as Scott Mormon. But the mystery deepened. Oceanographers estimated that it should have taken only 3 months for the boat to drift to the island. This left years unaccounted for, and when the Marshall Islands were surveyed in 1980, neither the boat nor the grave had been found. What happened during those missing years? Where were the remaining 4 men? No further clues have surfaced, leaving the fate of the crew of the Sarah Jo one of the ocean's strangest unsolved mysteries. The vanishing lighthouse keepers. On a remote, windswept island off the coast of Scotland sits the Flennon Isles Lighthouse, a lonely structure that witnessed one of history's most haunting disappearances. In December 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Duquette, and Donald MacArthur, were stationed on the island, tasked with maintaining the beacon that guided ships through treacherous waters. When the monthly supply ship arrived, the crew noticed something amiss. No one came out to greet them, and the lighthouse was eerily silent. Concerned, the ship's captain sent men ashore to investigate. Inside the lighthouse, they found an unsettling scene. 2 of the keepers' waterproof coats were missing, as if the men had gone out in bad weather. The kitchen table was set for a meal, but it seemed like the men had left in a hurry. The disappearance of the Martin family, a mystery in the Columbia River Gorge. On Sunday, December 7, 1958, around 1:00 p.m., the Martin family packed into their 1954 cream and red Ford station wagon and set off for the Columbia River Gorge. Their goal was to gather greenery from the woods for their Christmas decorations. 3 hours later, they stopped at a gas station in Cascade Locks, 40 miles from home, and then ate at the Paradise Snack Bar in Hood River, another 20 miles away. By this point, they were about 60 miles from home. The waitress at Paradise Snack Bar confirmed that everything seemed normal. When the Martins left around 5:00 p.m., though this raised suspicion since Ken Martin typically avoided driving at night due to his poor eyesight, that was the last verified sighting of the family. On December 9th, Ken's employer reported him missing after he failed to show up for work, something highly unusual for him. That same night, around 11:00 p.m., police visited the Martin home, where they found no signs of foul play or a break-in. Dishes were still in the sink, clothes were left in the washing machine, and even a Santa Claus costume from a Christmas party was still laid out on a bed, suggesting the family had planned to return soon. The news of their disappearance spread quickly, and multiple police agencies launched separate investigations. Authorities confirmed the Martins had been at the gas station and restaurant, but beyond that, they were stumped. In the search's early stages, police discovered an abandoned white Chevy near Cascade Locks that had been reported stolen from Los Angeles. This led them to investigate 2 ex-convicts, Roy Light and Lester Price, who had been at the Paradise Snack Bar at the same time as the Martins. However, without evidence linking them to the disappearance, the men were not questioned. Strangely, several individuals later reported possible sightings of the Martins across Oregon, Iowa, and even Montana. One pair of witnesses claimed to have seen the Martin station wagon near Cascade Locks, with two men speaking to the people inside, though this could not be confirmed. If true, it would have been the last sighting of the family. As the investigation continued, some believed the Martins may have accidentally driven into the Columbia River. However, an important clue emerged when tire tracks and paint chips consistent with the Martin station wagon were found near a cliff above the river. Despite this, a search of the area was never conducted, as two police officers deemed the location too dangerous for a dive. Detective Walter Graven, however, was told by two professional divers that the area was safe to search. Then, on the morning of May 2, 1959, a fisherman and his wife reported seeing two bodies floating downstream near the Bonneville Dam. The bodies, later identified as the Martin girls, Susan and Virginia, were recovered soon after. The official cause of death was drowning, but a technician suggested that both girls might have had bullet wounds to their heads. However, the medical examiner, Dr. Waterman, found no such injuries, and no police or newspaper reports supported the idea of foul play. Oddly, the girls had eaten burgers and fries shortly before their deaths, consistent with the waitress's testimony. Dr. Waterman also reported receiving threatening phone calls after the bodies were discovered, warning him not to identify the rest of the missing Martins. Of the family, only Donald Martin survived, though he had been estranged from his parents and sisters due to tensions in the family. Donald did not participate in the search and later claimed that his aunt encouraged him to stay in New York. However, his aunt denied this. Donald also skipped the memorial services for his sisters and later inherited his family's estate, worth $36,000 at the time. In 1954, Donald had been fired from a Portland department store for stealing over $2,000 in merchandise. Some speculate that he may have been involved in the disappearance of his family. A key discovery was made in January 1959 when a .38 caliber automatic pistol covered in blood was found near Cascade Locks. Strangely, the gun, which had been linked to Donald's theft, was never processed as evidence and was returned to its owner. Despite these troubling details, Donald was never formally accused of any involvement. To this day, the bodies of Ken, Barbara, and Barbie Martin remain missing, along with their vehicle. The tragic case of Kanika Jenkins, secrets behind the freezer death. The next case follows Kanika Jenkins, a young woman who disappeared in 2007. On September 8th, Kanika told her mother she was going out with friends to bowl and see a movie in celebration of her new job. Kanika borrowed her mother's car and left around 11 p.m. That was the last time her mother, Teresa, saw her. Kanika, born on May 27, 1998 in Chicago, was known to be a responsible and bright young woman with a close relationship with her mother. However, the night she disappeared, Kanika and her friends attended a party at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois, on the 9th floor. Though they entered the hotel around 1 a.m., their time there was less than enjoyable. They posted videos on Snapchat and Facebook complaining about aggressive flirting from men. Around 1:30 a.m., Kanika texted her sister for the last time. By 3:02 a.m., Kanika and her friends decided to leave the party. Kanika realized she had left her keys, phone, and belongings in the hotel room. Too intoxicated to walk, she was left behind while her friends went to retrieve them. When they returned, Kanika was gone. They searched the hotel but couldn't find her. Around 4 a.m., they contacted her mother, who came to the hotel to help search. Teresa grew suspicious of her daughter's friends, sensing they were under the influence of alcohol or drugs. The hotel staff refused to help or show the security footage without police permission. At 7:15 a.m., Teresa called 911, but the dispatcher advised her to wait until morning. The following day, Kanika was officially reported missing, and police began investigating. The next afternoon, an officer reviewing security footage discovered Kanika stumbling through the hotel hallways around 3:20 a.m. The footage showed her drunkenly navigating multiple floors before entering a kitchen that was under renovation. The last known footage shows her near a freezer area. Police speculate that she may have entered the freezer and became trapped, where her body was later found. Some believe the hotel may have been involved in Kanika's death, suggesting that she may have been lured into the freezer by someone working there. There is also speculation that her death could be a cover-up, as the hotel was aware of an illegal party involving underage drinking and drugs. Despite these theories, the true cause of Kanika's death remains unclear, and the details of the investigation may one day provide more answers.